The state trooper was shining a maglite through my passenger window at 12:47 in the morning at the rest area off I-77 south of Canton, Ohio. I was in the back seat of my 2014 Ram 1500 in a sleeping bag I'd bought at a Goodwill in Massillon for $11, and I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours when the light hit my face. I'd been living in that truck for 7 months. I sat up, found the trooper's eyes through the glass, and did what you learn to do when you're sleeping in your vehicle and law enforcement appears. I moved slowly, kept my hands visible, and rolled down the window with the practiced compliance of someone who understands that the distance between a warning and a problem is entirely a matter of how the next 60 seconds go. "Evening, sir, license and registration." His name tag said Okafor, late 30s, deliberate, the kind of cop who doesn't fill silence. I handed him my license and registration through the window. He took them back to his cruiser. I sat in the dark and waited and looked at the rest area parking lot the way you look at things at 1 in the morning when you've been living in a truck long enough that parking lots feel like home. 18-wheelers at the far end, a family sedan near the bathrooms, a vending machine lit up orange against the concrete wall. He was gone longer than I expected. When he came back, his face had changed, not hostile, something else, careful. "Mr. Mallory, your vehicle comes back clean." He paused. "But there's a flag on your Social Security, federal flag, Department of Justice marker. I don't have details from my end, but the flag has a contact protocol attached to it. I need you to stay here while I make a call." He went back to his cruiser. I sat in my sleeping bag in the back of my truck in a rest area off I-77 at 1 in the morning and tried to understand what a Department of Justice flag on my Social Security number could mean. "My name is Brent Mallory. I am 41 years old. I grew up in Canton, Ohio. My father, Robert Mallory, died of a stroke in 2009. My mother, Susan Mallory, died of ovarian cancer in 2020. I am not, as far as I have ever known, the kind of person who has federal flags attached to anything." I waited 22 minutes, I know, because I watched the clock on my phone. When Trooper Okafor came back, he handed me a card with a name and number written on it. "U.S. Marshals Service, Northern District of Ohio. The duty officer wants to speak with you tomorrow morning," he said. "Are you going to be reachable?" "I live in my truck. I'm always reachable." He looked at me with something that wasn't pity exactly, but lived close to it. "Stay safe, Mr. Mallory." He drove away. I sat in the dark with a business card from the United States Marshals Service and a question I didn't know how to begin asking. But before I tell you what the marshal told me the next morning, before I tell you about Pittsburgh and a man named Anthony Cavelli and a row house on Amberson Avenue and the 30 years that stood between me and the truth about my own name, I need to tell you how I ended up in a rest area at 41 years old. Because the federal flag is the second half of my story. The first half is the business my brother-in-law destroyed and the father-in-law who handed him the tools to do it. My name is Brent Mallory. I am a mechanic. Not a technician, not a service advisor, not a manager who watches other men work, a mechanic. I spent 20 years with my hands inside engines, and I know the difference between a noise that's nothing and a noise that's going to leave somebody stranded on the side of I-77 at midnight, and that knowledge is not something you get from a textbook. You get it from hours, from mistakes, from the particular education of breaking something and figuring out why and fixing it better than it was before. I opened Canton Auto and Diesel in 2011 when I was 28 years old with a lease on a bay on Cleveland Avenue, NW, 2 lifts, a set of Snap-on tools I'd paid off over 3 years, and a reputation in the Canton area for doing the job right the first time. In northeastern Ohio, in 2011, in a regional economy built on manufacturing and transportation and the blue-collar infrastructure that holds those things together, a mechanic who does the job right the first time is not a small thing. I grew the shop slowly, the way you grow something real, added a second bay in 2013, brought on 2 full-time guys in 2014. By 2019, I had 8 employees, a second location in North Canton, an annual revenue of just over $900,000. I held fleet accounts with 3 regional trucking companies and a construction outfit out of Akron. I paid my guys on time, I carried their health insurance even in the slow months, and I didn't charge for work I didn't do. I was not a rich man. I made around $78,000 a year, which in Canton is a decent living if you're careful. I drove a work truck. My knuckles were permanently scarred from ratchets. I had engine grease under my fingernails for so long I stopped noticing it. I was proud of what I'd built because I knew exactly what it had cost. In 2015, I met Holly Prescott at a Chamber of Commerce mixer in downtown Canton. She was 31, smart, the kind of woman who asks the right questions and actually listens to the answers. Her father was Gerald Prescott, who owned Prescott Commercial Development, one of the larger commercial property groups in Stark and Summit counties. Gerald built strip malls and managed commercial leases and had the specific manner of a man who has had money long enough that he's forgotten it wasn't always his. Holly and I were mismatched, and we both knew it from the beginning. Her family lived in a colonial in Lake Cable. I grew up in a 3-bedroom ranch on the east side of Canton. She went to Ohio State and majored in business. I went to Stark State for 2 years and then went to work because I wanted to be in a shop, not a classroom. She wore blazers to casual events. I owned one dress shirt and wore it to funerals and job interviews. We fell in love anyway, because that's what happens when two people pay genuine attention to each other, and because Holly, at 31, before her family's expectations had fully hardened around her, could look past the work clothes to the man wearing them. We got engaged in 2016. The engagement dinner was the first time I sat across a table from Gerald in a formal setting, with the specific intention of being welcomed into his family. He did not welcome me. Gerald was 62, silver-haired, the kind of man who calculates where he ranks in every room he enters. He sat at the head of the table at a restaurant in Jackson Township that he had a partial ownership stake in, and he looked at me the way a man looks at a problem he's going to have to manage. A mechanic, he said, not a question. A shop owner, I said, 2 locations. A mechanic with 2 locations, he said, like I'd made it worse. Holly looked at her bread plate. Her brother Rodney, who worked as a commercial building inspector for Stark County, smiled at the table in the particular way that men who've grown up with powerful fathers smile when the father is performing power. Not because they enjoy it, because they've learned that's what loyalty looks like. Gerald set down his fork and looked at me directly. I'll be plain because I think plain is better than pretending. Holly is accustomed to certain things. A mechanic's income doesn't provide those things. I don't know what she's told you or what you've told yourself, but I want you to understand where things stand. I know where I stand, I said. I stand with Holly. He didn't like that. Gerald Prescott was not accustomed to being answered back by men who worked with their hands. Holly said nothing. She looked at her plate. She didn't tell her father that was enough. She didn't look up. She sat in her chair and let her father tell the man she'd agreed to marry that he didn't belong at the table, and her silence sat in that room like a third person no one acknowledged. I should have understood what that silence meant. I didn't, or I understood and chose not to believe it yet. We married in June 2017. The marriage was not bad. It was the particular marriage that forms between a woman who loves a man her family disapproves of and a man who spends every year trying to make the disapproval irrelevant. I worked harder, grew the business bigger, added accounts, added equipment. Every dollar of revenue was a rebuttal to what Gerald had said at that dinner table, and every rebuttal was insufficient, because the verdict had never been about money. It was about class, and in Gerald's world, class is not something you earn with 2 lift bays and a good reputation. It's something you're born into. Our son Tyler was born in 2018, our daughter Haley in 2021. Tyler has my stubbornness and his mother's patience with people, the kind of kid who watches before he moves, who listens before he speaks. Haley has my laugh and her mother's precision. She was 4 years old and already correcting the adults around her on points of fact. She kept a small sketchbook everywhere she went and filled it with drawings of houses and cars, and one repeated drawing she labeled "Future Dog When Daddy Has a House." For a while the kids changed the temperature in the room. Gerald softened around his grandchildren the way certain hard men do, not toward me. But he showed up to Tyler's birthday parties and brought Haley books about animals and sat in the bleachers at T-ball games with the careful performance of a grandfather doing the work. Underneath the performance, he was building something. I just couldn't see the blueprint yet. In 2022, he started using it. I didn't understand what was happening at first because I was a mechanic, not a strategist. I understood compression ratios and torque specs and why a diesel engine loses power at altitude. I did not understand the mechanics of a man who has decided to dismantle you using the institutional machinery around him. It started with Rodney. My North Canton location had passed every inspection since I opened it. In January 2022, my brother-in-law, through a reassignment I still believe was not accidental, became the assigned inspector for that district. He came in for a routine visit and failed the bay on 3 items. A missing secondary containment pan under the waste oil drum, a fire extinguisher with an expired inspection tag, a ventilation measurement 2% below code minimum. Real enough violations that I couldn't dispute them formally. I fixed everything within the week. Rodney came back, failed it again. Electrical panel wasn't properly labeled. Eyewash station not mounted at the required height. Drainage slope was off by a degree. I fixed those. I hired a compliance consultant. I brought everything to code and then some. He failed it a 3rd time on a technicality so minor that the consultant told me she'd never seen it cited before. What I didn't know at the time, what I learned later, was that Rodney had been on the phone with Gerald between every visit. While the inspection cycle was grinding down my North Canton location, Gerald was making phone calls to the fleet account managers I'd spent 8 years building relationships with. Not loud calls. Gerald doesn't make loud calls. He is the kind of man who mentions concerns in the middle of conversations about other things, who frames deliberate damage as friendly advice. The fleet manager at one of my trucking accounts told me afterward that Gerald had called him to ask if he'd heard any concerns about the quality of work coming out of my shops. Said he'd heard some things, couldn't say exactly what. Just wanted to mention it as someone who'd done business in the Canton area a long time. 2 fleet accounts dropped me by March. One gave 30 days notice, the other just stopped scheduling work. Then Holly. In April 2022, she moved $14,000 from a joint and savings account, money I used as operating buffer, into an account in her name only. She said she was protecting our family's financial position. I asked her from what. Dad looked at the business finances. He's concerned about the debt exposure. When did your father look at our business finances? He asked to see them. I showed him. I looked at her and recognized the expression. The same one she'd worn at the engagement dinner when Gerald told me I didn't belong at his table and she looked at her bread plate. The expression of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting for you to figure it out. In July 2022, Rodney filed a formal complaint with the Ohio State Board of Motor Vehicle Repair, alleging that I had performed unauthorized work on a commercial vehicle under a fleet contract I wasn't certified for. The allegation was fabricated. I have been Ohio certified for commercial diesel work since 2008. The vehicle in question was a Class 6 truck for which I had both the certification and the documented customer authorization. I had the paperwork, I had the signatures. I had every inspection record going back to the day the job was scheduled. None of that mattered immediately because a complaint triggers a review, and a review triggers a hold on your operating license, and a hold means you cannot legally service commercial vehicles while the review is pending. The board told me the process would take 60 to 90 days. It took 8 months. 8 months during which I could not touch commercial fleet work, which was 40% of my revenue. 8 months during which my employees, 8 men and women who had trusted me with their livelihoods, started calling me with the particular apologetic tone of people who need to find other work. By the time the board cleared me, fully cleared, complaint dismissed, no violations found, insufficient evidence to support any allegation, 6 of my 8 employees were gone. The North Canton location had gone dark. The fleet accounts had signed with other shops. The Cleveland Avenue location was technically open, running on fumes, and one part-time mechanic who'd stayed because he was 63 and didn't want to start over somewhere new. Canton Auto and Diesel, 14 years built from 2 lift bays and a reputation, died in the spring of 2023. Holly filed for divorce that September. Gerald's attorney handled it. The settlement was efficient and total. She got the house in Jackson Township, which Gerald had co-signed a mortgage on. She got primary custody of Tyler and Haley. She got the Pilot. I got the Ram, my tools, and $6,200 in savings. The last thing Gerald said to me was outside the Stark County Courthouse after the final hearing. He was in a suit that cost more than my settlement. He watched me walk out with a folder of paperwork and nothing else and said almost quietly, "You were never built for this." I didn't answer him, not because I had nothing to say, because there is nothing useful to say to a man who spent 3 years dismantling everything you built using his son as the instrument and his daughter as the collaborator, and who summarizes those 3 years as a verdict on your character rather than his own. By October 2023, I was in the truck. The $6,200 lasted 11 weeks. I picked up cash work where I could, backyard mechanic jobs, working out of parking lots and driveways for people who needed repairs they couldn't afford shop rates for. I made enough to eat. I showered at the Pilot on Whipple Avenue 2 or 3 times a week, $9, which I treated as a non-negotiable expense because some forms of dignity cost money and $9 was mine. I saw my kids every other Saturday. I took Tyler and Haley to Nemesila Reservoir or the McKinley Library on Monument, or just to the McDonald's on Tuscarowas where Tyler ate 2 Big Macs without blinking, and Haley methodically deconstructed her Happy Meal and organized the components by category before eating them. Tyler was 13, old enough to understand what the truck meant, careful enough not to ask me about it straight on. He asked once, sideways, "Dad, are you figuring things out?" "Yeah, buddy, I'm figuring things out." "Grandpa Gerald says you made bad decisions." "Your grandpa and I see things differently." "I know," he said, "then I think you're figuring it out." Haley didn't ask questions and told me about her volcano project for school and showed me her sketchbook. Houses, cars, and the drawing she kept returning to labeled in her 7-year-old handwriting, "Future dog when daddy has a house." "I'm getting a house," I told her. "With a garage. With a real garage, not a parking lot." "Can I paint my room?" "Any color you want. Yellow and white." Then yellow and white it is. That was January, 2 months before Trooper Okafor knocked on my window. The day after the rest stop, I called the number on the card at 8 in the morning. A woman named Deputy U.S. Marshal Carolyn Vance introduced herself and told me she needed to meet with me in person. She was the WITSEC case coordinator for the Northern District. She said there were things about my family history that required a formal conversation. I had to look up WITSEC in the parking lot. Witness Security Program. Federal Witness Protection. I drove to the Federal Building on East 9th Street in Cleveland the next morning and sat across a conference table from a woman with a case file and the measured manner of someone who has had this conversation before and knows there is no clean way to deliver it. "Mr. Mallory," she said, "I should address you more accurately. Your legal birth name is Marco Cavelli. You were born on August 22, 1983 at McGee Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Your father's name was Anthony Cavelli. Your mother was Elena Cavelli. In October 1992, when you were 9 years old, your family was relocated to Canton, Ohio under the Witness Security Program. New identities, new records, new lives. You became Brent Mallory. Your father became Robert Mallory. Your mother became Susan Mallory. My father's name was Robert. He coached my Little League team. He drove a used Buick he kept running for 12 years because he was good with engines and didn't believe in payments. He taught me to drive in the parking lot of Fawcett Stadium on a Sunday morning in April when I was 15, and he laughed when I clipped a cone and told me I was going to be fine. He died of a stroke at 61, and I carried his coffin at St. Joan of Arc on 30th Street NW with 6 men who had known him, every one of them as Robert Mallory. None of those men knew what Carolyn Vance was telling me now. "Why?" I asked. "Your father worked as a bookkeeper for a freight brokerage in Pittsburgh's Strip District. The company was connected to a labor union racketeering operation. In the fall of 1991, he witnessed the company's owner ordering a contract assault on a union official who had been cooperating with federal investigators. He contacted the FBI. His testimony led to a RICO prosecution, 9 convictions. My father testified against an organized crime-connected operation. Yes, the threat assessment indicated credible risk to your family. The Marshal Service placed all 3 of you into WITSEC, new identities, new city. Canton was selected because your mother had a distant cousin there. Not close enough to create a security risk, but enough that she'd have some thread of familiarity in an unfamiliar place." She turned to a specific page in the folder. "The last defendant convicted through your father's testimony died in federal prison 14 months ago. The case is formally closed. We have been trying to locate you for 11 months. The flag on your social security number was activated as part of the search protocol to deliver case closure notification and release the trust assets." She laid a summary sheet on the table. The Cavelli family home at 2218 Amberson Avenue in Pittsburgh's Shadyside neighborhood, purchased 1988, maintained in a federal property trust since 1992. Current appraised value $615,000. A whole life insurance policy on Anthony Cavelli, face value $200,000, paid out on his death in 2009, held in trust, with accumulated interest $318,000. A savings account, balance at time of protection $34,000, with 32 years of compounding, approximately $89,000. Federal victim restitution. His father's cooperation had enabled the seizure of approximately $18 million from the racketeering enterprise. The restitution formula allocated $490,000 to the Cavelli family, held in trust pending case closure. Total assets awaiting release approximately $1.5 million. I looked at the numbers. I looked at Carolyn Vance, who was watching me with the stillness of someone who has learned that silence is the only right response to this moment. "One more item," she said, "not financial." She produced a cardboard box from under the table with a Marshal Service evidence seal on the side. "When your family entered WITSEC, they surrendered all materials connecting them to the Cavelli identity. These have been in federal storage since 1992. They belong to you." Inside the box, wrapped in tissue paper, photographs. My parents young, standing in front of a brick row house on a street lined with maples. My mother holding a baby in a kitchen with yellow curtains, smiling down at the top of the baby's head. My father at a backyard table with 3 other men, laughing, wearing a Pittsburgh Pirates jersey. The photograph so ordinary and unguarded that it looked like something from another world. A wedding photograph, Anthony and Elena Cavelli, 1982. She wore a white dress with a high lace collar. He wore a rented tuxedo with a bow tie that was slightly the wrong size and the expression of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. They were standing outside a church in Pittsburgh's Garfield neighborhood, grinning at the camera with the particular ease of 2 people who have no idea what's coming. A report card, Marco Cavelli, 2nd grade, Colfax Elementary School, Pittsburgh. Very good at math, needed improvement in keeping his desk organized. And at the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope. My father's handwriting on the front, Not the handwriting I knew from grocery lists and birthday cards signed Robert. Different, smaller, more deliberate. The handwriting of a man writing as someone he'd set aside for 20 years. I opened it. One page, undated. If you're reading this, the case is done and the marshals found you and I'm probably gone. I need you to know why we did what we did. In the fall of 1991, 2 men came to our apartment on Amberson Avenue. They sat in our kitchen and they told me that if I testified, they were going to hurt you. Not me, you. You were 9 years old. You were in the next room doing homework. These men sat in my kitchen and threatened my 9-year-old son. I testified anyway, because the alternative was spending the rest of my life keeping books for people who threatened children, and because the marshals told me they could protect us. We gave up Pittsburgh. We gave up our families. Your grandmother died in 2001 and I could not go to the funeral because going would have broken cover, and I was still afraid of what that meant for you. I missed my own mother's funeral to keep you safe. I need you to understand what kind of weight that is so you understand what kind of weight you were worth to us. I don't know what your life has looked like. I hope you found work that meant something to you. You were a stubborn, hard-headed kid, and I always thought those qualities would take you somewhere. The house on Amberson Avenue is yours, the money is yours, the name Cavelli is yours if you want it. I'm sorry you're reading this in a government building instead of hearing it from me at the kitchen table. I'm sorry the only way I could give you the truth was to leave it in a box. But I want you to know that walking into that federal courthouse in 1991 was the easiest decision I ever made, because the alternative was raising you in the shadow of men who threatened my boy. You were worth every single thing we gave up. Be good, work honest, don't let anyone tell you that you're less than what you are. Your father, Anthony Cavelli. I sat in a conference room on the 9th floor of a federal building in Cleveland and held a letter from a dead man who had given up his name and his city and his mother's funeral to keep me alive. Robert Mallory, who coached my Little League team and drove a used Buick and drove it himself when the engine knocked because he knew how to fix it and didn't want to pay somebody else, who taught me to change my own oil at 13 and told me that knowing how to take care of what you own is a form of self-respect. That man was Anthony Cavelli, a Pittsburgh bookkeeper who had walked into a federal courtroom and pointed a finger at dangerous people and then come to Canton and lived as someone else for the rest of his life without once letting me see the seam. I had believed my father was ordinary. I was wrong about that in every possible direction. He was the bravest person I have ever known. I left the federal building at 3:40 in the afternoon. I sat in my truck in the parking garage and called my son. Dad? Hey buddy, something happened today. Something big. I'll tell you about it Saturday. Good big or bad big? Good big, really good. Does this mean you're figuring things out? Yeah, I think it finally does. I called Haley. She told me about her volcano project and asked if the future dog was still happening. I told her yes. She asked if her room could be yellow and white. I told her yellow and white it was going to be. The asset transfer took 4 months. Federal trust required time, paperwork, verification, identity confirmation, legal filings. My name is now officially Marco Brent Cavelli. I kept Brent as a middle name because it's been my name for 41 years and I have no interest in becoming a stranger to myself. Most people in Canton still call me Brent. The house on Amberson Avenue appraised at $628,000 by the time the transfer completed. I flew to Pittsburgh in June, first time I'd ever been there as an adult. I took a cab to Shadyside to President Street, Amberson Avenue, and stood on the sidewalk in front of a red brick row house with white trim and a front stoop my mother had swept before I was old enough to hold a broom. I went around to the back, small yard. Against the fence an old rosebush, still sending up canes, still blooming in the June warmth with the tenacity of something that has not been properly cared for in 30 years and has continued anyway. My mother planted that rosebush, I don't know when. Before 1992, before the marshals came, before she became Susan Mallory and moved to Canton and raised her son under a government-issued name. She planted it in her backyard and then she left and it grew for 30 years without her. I am a mechanic. I know what it means to keep something running when no one's paying attention to it. I know what it means to work on an engine in the dark until the thing finally turns over. My mother planted a rosebush. My father walked into a courthouse. I ended up fixing engines in Canton, Ohio without knowing any of it, and here I was 30 years later standing in their backyard looking at proof that things planted in honest ground don't stop growing just because the person who planted them had to leave. After taxes and legal fees, approximately $1.3 million cleared to my accounts. The Pittsburgh house is worth another $628,000 if I sell it. I am not going to sell it. I am going to restore it because a row house on Amberson Avenue in Shadyside is not an asset. It is the place where my parents fell in love and planted a rose bush and brought home a son, and were threatened and were brave and left everything behind so that the son could grow up safe in a different city under a different name. I bought a house in Canton on 23rd Street W, 3 bedrooms, a double garage, a corner lot, $287,000 cash, Tyler's room, Haley's room, yellow and white as specified. I had the garage wired for equipment before I moved a single piece of furniture in. The custody is now 50-50. Holly didn't contest it. I think without either of us saying it, she understood that the situation had changed. About Rodney. In the fall of 2023, the Ohio Inspector General's office opened an investigation into commercial inspection practices in Stark County following a complaint from a property owner in Alliance who had been subjected to 17 consecutive failed inspections on a legitimate warehouse renovation. The investigation expanded. It turned out my brother-in-law had developed a pattern: businesses that Gerald's network had commercial disputes with, businesses that hadn't played along, businesses that simply got in the way. My shop was not the only one. 3 other Canton area businesses had similar experiences. Rodney surrendered his state certification in January 2024, presumably on advice of counsel. He is currently facing civil liability claims from 2 of the businesses he targeted. I did not file a complaint. Someone else, with less to lose than I'd had at the time, did the work for me. Gerald knows about the Cavelli assets. A commercial broker connected to his network called me in August asking if I was interested in selling the Amberson Avenue property through a development firm that Gerald had a consulting relationship with. I declined. I did not return Gerald's subsequent call. There is nothing useful to say to a man who spent 3 years using institutional leverage to destroy something I built with 14 years of honest work, and who summarizes those 3 years as a judgment on my character rather than his own. I reopened the shop in September, 1 bay on Cleveland Avenue, just me and one other mechanic, a young guy named Felix who I'd known since he was an apprentice at a fleet shop in Massillon and who I always knew was going to be good. The sign doesn't say Canton Auto and Diesel anymore. The sign says Cavelli Auto Service. First customer called on a Tuesday, woman from Perry Township, 2018 F-150 running rough under load. Mr. Cavelli. That's me. My neighbor says you're the best diesel mechanic in Stark County. Your neighbor's right. What's it doing? We talked for 4 minutes. She brought the truck in Thursday. I had it diagnosed by noon: injector issue, fuel rail pressure dropping under load. I explained what I found, quoted her a number, told her it'd be done by Friday afternoon. The dealership quoted me twice that, she said. I don't charge for work I don't do. Friday afternoon, the truck was done. She drove it around the block and came back with the expression of someone whose vehicle has been returned to them in better condition than they dared hope for. It runs like it's new, she said. It should hold for another 100,000 miles if you keep up with the maintenance. Bring it back in at the next oil interval, and I'll check the injector rail pressure again. That's the thing about engines. They're not mysterious. They're complicated, but they're not mysterious. Every problem has a cause, and every cause has a fix. And if you do the work honestly and don't cut corners and don't charge for what you didn't do, the thing runs. That's what I know how to do. That's what I've always known how to do. Gerald Prescott sat at the head of a table in a restaurant he had a stake in, and he looked at me and told me I wasn't built for this. He meant Holly. He meant the life. He meant the gap between a mechanic's income and whatever number he'd decided was the entry fee for his family. He didn't know he was looking at the son of a man who sat across a kitchen table from men who threatened his child and testified against them anyway. He didn't know that the stubbornness he read as limitation was the same quality that had kept an untended rosebush growing in a Pittsburgh backyard for 30 years. He was measuring a man he didn't know with a ruler that didn't fit. The engine doesn't care what Gerald Prescott thinks. It runs or it doesn't, and that's determined by the work, not the opinion. I know how to do the work, I always have. They told me I wasn't built for this. The truck starts every time.